I'm Sarah, and I'm a food addict. And we're laughing because I started talking a minute ago and then the recording started. Um, and a chaos creator, controller, fixer, obsessor, adrenaline addict. Those are all one thing, codependent. And and I was asked to share, and what's been on my thoughts a lot lately is grace, because I was at a book sale and I came across this book, um, which is published in 1989. So it's 35 years old. But I remember this author from years ago. It's a Bible study, and I did a different one of her Bible studies. Here she is in all of her 1989 glory with her hairstyle and her big shoulder pads. And I really like the Bible study I did way back with her. She's the kind of author who gets you right into your Bible writing, like putting colors and symbols, and she really understands how to apply the Bible to real life. And so I thought the topic is, this is such a great dated title. Lord, I need grace to make it. That's the title. And as I'm reading through this, I really feel like this is kind of like this is explaining recovery for people without recovery. Like, this is explaining grace, like how to actually, I feel like walking into recovery, I already knew Jesus and I already did Bible studies, but I didn't know I had a disease, and I didn't know why I was having so much trouble with food. And then I discovered I also, like, all of that was rooted in it was all tied up in a lot of adrenaline and stress. And I didn't know all of that. And as I walked into recovery, I had to come past my prejudices against God. And recovery walked me into living a life with God that is much closer and deeper. And not only that, but actually set me free from these things that I was never free from before. And this book seems to be trying to explain that to people. And I feel like recovery's better. I don't wish everybody needed recovery, but boy, I would never have learned it from this book. But now that I've walked it with recovery, this book makes sense to me, and it's helping me see God's grace. And it's about God's grace. So that's what I wanted to talk about, because that's what I'm thinking about lately. So grace, like what's the point of this topic? Like, what's the application of grace? Grace helps me come to God as I am. It helps me trust God to change my character rather than work on my character defects myself. Grace helps me with Rule 62. Do y'all know what Rule 62 is? I needed to learn what Rule 62 is. Somebody gave me a Rule 62 medallion because I needed it so badly. And it's Rule 62 is don't take yourself too damn seriously. And I needed that too. So grace helps me live Rule 62 in daily life. Grace helps me let go and let God. Grace helps me let go of concerns about other people's responses, because God's grace is the only power that's going to work in them too. So what is grace? Sorry, that's probably really loud. Sorry. People can give grace or be gracious. So in that sense, grace is favor that I didn't earn, favor that I don't merit. So an example is a boss who gives his employee paid leave while the employee has family sickness that they're trying to deal with. The boss doesn't have to, and there's nothing in the contract that says he's obligated, but he's just a gracious boss and wants to freely give what he can. So that would be an example of human giving grace. It's The grace is favor that I didn't earn. God's grace is that, but it's much more. His grace is everything and anything that you and I will ever need made available to us in and through Jesus. Grace is God's power at work. It's never earned. It's freely given. And God is full of grace. So I experienced this in recovery, like just as the first example that came to my mind was step 2. Like it says, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. In page 60 says that probably no human power could have relieved our addiction, but God could and would if he were sought. That's talking about God's grace. I experienced that. I knew I had a problem. I knew it was getting worse. I was getting way worse. My food problems were getting very exaggerated and rapidly happening more and more frequently. And I thought it was up to me. Like at the end of the day, isn't it up to me to stop this? Like, didn't I get myself here? Don't I need to be the one to somehow stop? That was my prejudice against God. I could not see how God would do this. How was it that it was his job to do this? I never really did understand. I never read a book that said, this is God's job, just trust him. I didn't take an idea and apply it. I ran out of ideas. I ran out of what else can I try? And I got really desperate. And people around me who were helping me encouraged me and said, would you try doing the steps? Would you try getting outside help? Would you what else do you need? And I started thinking about, I think I need to stop working my job. I need time. This is not going well. I need to stop working. And as I did things towards God, help me, I'm desperate, something shifted. And I experienced this change that happened where God stopped the obsessions. I started taking care of the things he was asking me to do, not taking care of my food, the other things like the steps and getting outside help and pursuing how do I get help. And he came and changed what was going on inside of me. So that was an experience of God's grace. It was his power at work in me. There's a Bible verse that talks about God's grace. It's in Romans, and it says, when people work, their wages are not a gift. Workers earn what they receive. But people are declared righteous because of their faith, not because of their work. And according to this verse, people are declared righteous by God. They're declared by God to be in right standing with him because of their faith, not because of their works. Jesus did everything that needed to be done. There's nothing for me to add, only to accept my need and his work on my behalf. And that's grace too. Another example of experiencing this would be in step 10. All the steps, you can find God's grace everywhere. Like everything we do relies on God's grace. But step 10 popped into my mind. When I was reading through it last night, it said, our next function is to grow. It should continue for our lifetime. When these things pop up, selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, we ask God at once to remove them. So when I'm watching in step 10, I'm watching for these things throughout. I'm carrying on this inventory on a daily basis. I'm just watching for those things that are objectionable popping up, but I'm not, it says I ask God to remove it. That's God's grace. I'm not the one fixing my character defects, so I am watching. I'm paying attention. I'm participating. I'm not, it's not that I'm not involved. It's not that I'm not involved, but I'm not the one doing the part that I can't do, parts of this I can't do, and God is doing that for me. Another example of where we experience this, I was thinking of step 6, where it says we became willing to have God remove all these defects of character. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping all around. These are just as the things occurred to me. But when I became willing to have God remove all these defects of character, there's something deep going on in my heart. I'm not yet at the part where he's actually taking them away, but the part where I become willing to let God be the one to take care of like how I show up in the world, to let God be the one who's going to take, the prayer expresses it. In the next step, I offer myself to you, the good and the bad. You can have all of me, the good and the bad. So in the step 6, I become willing to let God have that job. I experience God's grace, even being willing to say, okay, I'm not doing a great job at growing myself. And I guess if I could have, we often say, if I could have done it any better, I would have. If I could have done it any differently, I would have. So I become willing. That's God's grace to me, that even happens on the inside of me. And we experience God's grace in the promises that get answered, that we hear about. There's another Bible verse as well. It talks more about grace in the context of his love. This is in what the Apostle John wrote in one of his letters. It says, "This is real love. It is not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his son as a sacrifice to take away our sins." I think about that verse and I think love is here right now, like even right now where we're sitting, love is here from God. And my security doesn't rest on my love towards God. My security rests on his love for me, which is constant. And in this verse, I see that I also see that I might make a religion out of loving God. That I have a tendency to do that. I've done that in my past, where because every time I take a step of love towards God, he always reciprocates. Like, I love God and I sense something or I feel a connection with God if I take the time to love him. So then I can twist that around and make a religion out of that. Like, okay, so my connection with God relies on me loving him. And that's when good stuff happens. And I can twist it around and somehow make it about me, that I did it. So now the pressure, my perception becomes the pressure is on me to be good at loving God. And I make a religion out of loving God. But real love is from God towards us. And there's no religion in that. So I'm totally secure because of grace. And I'll just read a little bit more that this 1980s lady wrote. She captured something that someone else wrote. Grace implies ever a favor freely done without claim or expectation of return. It lays the whole, so there was this Aristotle, actually, this Greek guy, lays the whole stress on this very point, that grace is conferred freely with no expectation of return, and finding its only motive in the bounty and free-heartedness of the giver. That's amazing and reassuring to me about God. So grace is given, grace is free. It is freely given without any cause within me. It's always given because that is the heart of God. It is always given, never owed, never earned, never deserved. It is a benefit bestowed, and I just accept it by faith. Um, so um, the one last point that I was thinking about related to this is over the last few months or several months, starting to rely on God's grace more, and he's taking away the pressure that I have had, that I've perceived that I need to be the one always coming up with making everything okay. He's taking that pressure away. I'm starting to trust that God's got this. I'm more often saying, let go and let God. And it starts to become a bit more something I'm experiencing. And I start to relax. And then I wonder, so what's my motive now to keep me going back to God? Because I'm not quite as desperate as I was. I'm not experiencing that kind of stress all the time. And one of the things that he's been encouraging me is just that remembering is important. And so if I start to forget why I need God, I might forget to thank him, but I can remember. I can do things to remember. And so a specific example would be when I first started taking time off work, and I really engaged, like after I had a real good start into, I'm starting to experience God's grace in recovery. I happen to find these little Post-it notes. I'm looking at my wall because they're on my wall. I happen to find these. Here, I'll pick one. They're these little Post-its in the dollar store that they're little daisies. They're really cute. Just whimsical Post-it notes instead of having like a blank square. And God would, when I felt like I was hearing something from God, I would write it down. If I had something that someone would say in one of these meetings, I would write it down, or something in one of my readings, I'd write it down. And so over time, I have accumulated these little daisies on my wall. So it looks like a garden. And just as an aside, I have never found these little daisy Post-it notes since then in the store. I've been looking for them. So it's just another little hug from God that at the right time, these popped up, because it's been a real encouragement for me to have them right here. And so now, like, the wall is pretty full and they're starting to fade, and I can't keep them there forever. So I decided something that would help me remember God's grace is I got some paint and some supplies, and I'm trying to recreate this in a more permanent version. So I'm going to get to go through them again, deciding how I'm going to arrange this. And I'm not much of a painter, but that doesn't matter. So I'll paint some daisies and I'll paint the words, and I'll have something that I can keep. And then I'll take down these daisy Post-it notes off my wall. It's just a practical thing that I can do that's helping me remember, now that I'm not so stressed, where I was and how God kept showing up all this, like so many days he showed up. There was one day I decided, I was given a place to stay when I was in a really bad way at a friend's house. And the time came when I realized actually the opportunity was there to move in, not just stay temporarily, but move in. So was I willing to give up my old apartment? And so the time came that I did that, and I had a garage sale, and I was getting rid of a lot of stuff, and I was wondering about which stuff to keep and which stuff to sell. And I was a bit just a bit emotional about all of that. And the day before I'm going to pull this one down too. The day before that happened, this was my reading in my morning reading. You, Lord, you alone are my inheritance, my cup of blessing. You guard all that is mine. And it was just so pointed at, like, I'm about to have a garage sale, have my personal stuff up for sale. People are going to be looking through it and saying, I don't want this. This is garbage. Or I love this. I want this. And I felt like God was just really showing me he totally sees that. And he was right there with me. And so that's another one of the little daisies on my wall that I get to keep and look at to remember a specific thing. Like I would have forgotten about that by now if I didn't have that little reminder, because so much happened in those months. I wouldn't have remembered that detail. So remembering is something that's turning out to be pretty important to help me keep experiencing God's grace. But God's grace is going to be constant, even if I forget. So that's where my security is.